Hey guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host Steve Hall, and I am very, very thankful to have Peter Fitschen as my guest today. So Peter, if you don't know who he is, has a PhD in Nutritional Science, has a Master's of Science in Biology and Physiology, and has a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry. So he's obviously a very smart guy, and if you go onto his website, you can actually go and look over his entire CV, which I did and was incredibly impressed and also kind of shocked by how much there was there. And the number of publications you've also been in, Peter, is like outstanding. But I think as our audience, a lot of them are bodybuilders, powerlifters, they probably know of the kind of the recommendations for natural bodybuilders in training, supplementation and nutrition that you've done with kind of Eric Helms and Alan Aragon and those people. So Peter's a very smart guy and we're very lucky to have him on the show. He's also competed a lot. So 2004, 2006, 2008, 2012 and 2016 just gone. So with good gaps in between as well, which is probably going to come up during our discussion, in which we're going to talk about kind of how do you decide whether you're ready to compete? And if you are in prep, how do you decide if there are any kind of sticking points? How do you make rational decisions? And whether there's ever a point at which you should pull out? But before we get into that, I do want to make sure if there's anything I missed or anything Peter wants to add to what I've said, because I kind of probably glazed over a lot of what Peter is and who you are and what you're about. And I know you work quite closely with obviously De Novo Nutrition and Cliff Wilson and that kind of good group of people.
Yeah. So, I think that's a pretty good intro. Other than what you had mentioned, I own Fit Body and Physique LLC, so I work with a number of athletes, bodybuilders primarily, but I do have some general population clients as well. And then, other than that, I write for the De Novo Elements series. So, Eric Helms, Mike Zordos, there's a whole slew of people that you've had on this show, podcast that are involved with that. Ben, Esgro. And then, Cliff and I got some collaboration stuff in the works too. So, so I think you covered it.
And for the listeners, if it isn't already clear, or if you don't know Peter's background, like he lives for bodybuilding and loves the sport. And I think you have a really healthy relationship with it. From what I've seen, I've heard you on other podcasts. I've seen you on kind of social media and things, and kind of, it's always a pleasure hearing you talk about the sport, because I think a lot of people can have a bit of a downer on it, like it's really hard, like it's grindy and uncomfortable. But I think if you get things outlined in the right way, you can actually like really enjoy the sport, and like it becomes like part of your lifestyle, part of your life, and kind of really complements it, which I think we're going to talk about and kind of hopefully help any kind of people who are thinking to compete or are competing and haven't found that love with it. They've kind of in love with it, but it's kind of like a love-hate at times, how we can make that more enjoyable for them. So to begin with, I did want to touch on kind of what does competing mean? Kind of what does that actually entail? Because I think a lot of people just see it as kind of like fat loss and they just need to drop calories, add cardio. Although actually people who don't have any clue about it often think that it's building into the show, or at least that's what they think I'm doing. They think I'm building muscle into a bodybuilding show, probably because I'm so small or skinny, and they're thinking of like the big, like Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler, and everyone. But yeah, what does it mean to compete for you, Peter?
Yeah, so for me, I guess, competing personally, I guess what it means for me at this point is every time I diet down, and do a show, it's about pushing myself to get further than I have before. So get look better than I did the last time. And, I made a post a while back, where I put all 5 times I've been stage lean over the last like decade plus, side by side. And, if you mix those all up, those pictures up without a date, and you handed the 5 pictures to someone, they could put them in order because,
amazing,
based on how I look. And that's my opinion, what the goal should be. You should be improving over time. You shouldn't be just competing over and over and over and looking the exact same. At some point, age will probably kick in, and that, I'm still in my early 30s, and, at some point here in the next, 10, 15 years, I might hit a point where that, starts happening. But, I think just for me, I want to be better every time I step on stage, and, if you do that, a lot of the placing stuff that everyone's worried about will kind of take care of itself. You know, like I started out early in my career, my first show, I, you know, took last in teen and like second to last in novice. Like it was not good. But then like 2 years later, I looked better, and all of a sudden I was competitive in novice classes and okay in open. And then a couple years later, all right, I'm competitive in open now. And then a few years later, all right, I won an overall. And then I, you know, competed at the pro level. And so it as I, you know what I mean? As I got better over time, the placing stuff, a lot of, you know, because everyone, it's really common for people to come into the sport and they're like, I want to win. I want to win my pro card. Like, I mean, you as a coach, I mean, you probably hear that all the time. You know, what's your goal? Well, I want to win. Well, we all want to win, you know, like, but you know, so much of placing is out of your control, you know, like you could look amazing, but one person who looks better than you shows up and you're not winning the overall.
Yeah.
Or it could be really close. I mean, I've competed against people where I've beaten them in 1-point decisions, and then a different panel of judges, I've seen the same competitor and they've beaten me by like a point or two, you know, like really close. You know, and so some of those aspects, you know, you can't control. And so all you can control is how you look. And so, I mean, for me, it's getting better over time, you know, and always improving as I progress.
No, I love that. And I love the fact you brought up, well, I think for a lot of kind of people who don't have outstanding genetics, the ones who you don't see on social media loads, because most people see on social media are the ones with fantastic genetics, great physiques, and they kind of go pro in like their first or second season. Whereas I really relate to someone like yourself, whereas like in my first season, I didn't do terribly, but I didn't do amazingly. But I wanted to give it another shot. This time round, I'm now like 5 weeks out from my first show, and I'm feeling so much better. I look so much better. Like the photos are so different, and I'm falling in love with it more and more as I give it a chance. I wish the first time had gone a bit better, but it doesn't always kind of go how you want it to. And in terms of kind of, looking to be better each time, what have you done kind of in between shows, in between years, to ensure that that's happened? Kind of what, because competing is quite a small part of a bodybuilder's career, but the time between that is so important to set you up for that kind of period of time.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing I've done, and I would recommend to anyone who's natural and has pretty average genetics like I do, is spend more time not dieting between shows than you're spending dieting. You see people who they try to compete every single year, but they don't look any different because, it's going to take a few months. If you look at some of the case studies out there, it takes, and some of my clients who have had hormone levels measured after a show, 3-4 months, even with someone who gains weight back rapidly, it still takes 3-4 months before hormone levels are normal, from what I've seen. And, if you look at some of the case studies, it could even be 6-7 months before they're all the way back to normal. And so, by that point, if you're doing a show every year, you're going to have to turn around and start dieting again. So you just got to the place where you're in a good spot to start gaining muscle, and very shortly thereafter, now you're dieting again. And so that doesn't give you much time to improve. And so I think just spending time, at a place where you feel comfortable and can be strong, and make progress is going to be key. And I think for most people, most of us who have been stage lean, I think we can all relate to this, that there's some threshold where you kind of get below that threshold and you can just tell things aren't normal. They're just not right. Your energy is terrible. Your strength starts to go in the gym. You move. You don't want to move. Like you're hungry all the time. You don't sleep well. You have no sex drive. On and on and on. If you're natural, that's gonna, and you get lean enough, that's probably going to be something you have to deal with at the end of prep. But that doesn't mean you should live there long term. And so there's gonna have to be some amount of weight to gain back to get above that threshold. And then I just kind of live above that threshold basically until it's time to diet again. And so for me personally, carved up on stage, I was like 158, 159 last time around. I'm not that big. And so for me, somewhere 172, 175, that's that threshold for me, 170 maybe, and so I really don't drop much below 175 the entire off season, and so I'm at least 15 pounds over stage weight for that entire stretch of time until the later part of prep when I get below there, and I may cut in there. So, I may get up to 190 or, you know what I mean? Let my weight drift for a while. But, you know, when I come back down, I'm only cutting back down to, you know, 175, 180, something like that. And then, you know, just slight surplus, slowly let it drift for a long time without getting too sloppy, and then, you know, cut back down again. But never cutting to the point where I really feel terrible or lose a ton of strength or anything like that. And I think that's key, is just being okay with, you know, walking around 15, 20, 25 pounds over stage weight, you know, if you're a guy, you know, because for the average guy, that's probably going to be the comfortable place where you feel good. You're making strength gains in the gym, and you're adding muscle and eating a decent amount to do that.
I think for most, I think it's becoming more well known that staying that little bit leaner, not only staying a bit closer to stage weight is going to help, so you don't have to diet for as long, but kind of you're more insulin sensitive. It's a bit better zone for building muscle. And I think like the zone you're talking about is probably that 10 to 15%. People are going to fall within that. Someone you might get people at either end of the bell curve, like Alberto Nunez probably can stay below 10% and feel like productive. Whereas I know there's other guys who need to kind of get over 15% to really start like having productive training. But yeah, staying within that over the course of time is kind of important. But like you said, between shows, you need things to heal effectively. Kind of like we were talking before we were on air, and like your calories are so high in your off season, but that's really helped, because imagine if you didn't give yourself the time to build your calories up to that point, and then you started dieting when they were even lower, and you'd have to cut even lower. And yeah, you see people do this year to year, and I think they're the ones who don't look different year to year, and they fall out of love with it. To touch on kind of, obviously you've competed for a long time now. Did you think about it before you did your first show, kind of how, I mean, or do you now have a different perspective on how long you should wait before you compete? Would you have decided to have competed later, or what's your view on kind of a novice competitor? How early is too early?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, I definitely competed probably before I was ready. I mean, I started lifting, you know, and 2 years after I started lifting, I was on stage doing a show. And if you look at the pictures of me when I started my prep, I mean, looking back, I don't even look like I lifted weights hardly. I mean, that, you know what I mean? Like, that's how, you know, small I was, and just how average my genetics were. I mean, even after the newbie gains, I gained 45 pounds in the first like 2 years I was lifting weights, and stayed around the same body fat percentage, you know, roughly. And, you know, which isn't uncommon for an average guy. But I mean, I still didn't even hardly look like I lifted weights. And, you know, I dieted down. You know, there were a bunch of people in my gym doing a show, and so I dieted down with them. They're like, "Oh, you should do this. You've made such good progress. You know, you can do a teen class." You know, I was 18, senior year of high school, and so I did, and you know, it didn't go very well, which was really disappointing. But you know, it kind of pissed me off, and I was like, I'm gonna show them. You know, and you know, I still made a bunch of mistakes, but yeah, I think it was good, because just to do it. I got the experience. In hindsight, I should have probably waited longer before the next show. You know, I shouldn't have probably done another show 2 years later. I wish I would have given, you know, I wish I would have done 3 or 4 years, you know, after that first show, and let myself grow till I was 21, 22. You know, and I mean, I still looked better at, you know, when I was 20 than I was at 18, and then 22 was better than 20. But I think if I'd have just held off till 21, 22 and not dieted down, but it was complicated too, because after that first show, you know, I was 18 years old. It was 2004. You know, bodybuilding.com message boards were in their infancy, and they didn't look anything. It was just like one board. Like, it didn't look like it did now. And, you know, so I was 18. The information wasn't out there, and I was told by judges I needed to get bigger. And so I was 145 on stage at my first show. And when I started dieting, you know, within 2 years, I was up to 210.
Wow.
I bulked. You know, I you know, like, because I needed to get bigger, you know, and so it did net me like an extra, it was about 11 pounds heavier when I stepped on stage 2 years later. Part of that was still years 2 through 4 of my training age, you know, so I could have gained that staying leaner, you know, but you know, it you know, it is what it is. I learned in hindsight, and ever since that, I haven't gotten much above. I think the heaviest I've ever hit since then was I did hit 196 here this offseason before a recent cut. But Yeah. So, I mean, I think, getting back to the question, I think, it wasn't bad for me to compete. It was good experience. I wish I would have known more going in. I feel like new competitors today have access to a lot more information than I did.
Yeah.
Back, 13 years ago when I did my first show, you just had, natural bodybuilding wasn't big at all. And, most of the people competed in the NPC. There weren't hardly any natural shows. And what you knew about bodybuilding was pretty much from the people at your gym. You just didn't have the resources you have today.
So I guess at least if the viewers are taking anything from that, I kind of took from it is you probably say someone should kind of eke out all of their kind of newbie gains almost.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still compete as a junior. You just probably would have started off lifting earlier than someone else.
Or if you did it, if you want to do a show relatively early in your training career and you do something 2-3 years in, then just take a few years, get the experience, then take a few years, and wait till you're 5-6 years, into training or something and do it again when you're going to be more competitive, and by the time I was 6 years into my training career, I mean, I was competitive in open classes and things, but I could have probably been more competitive had I not already, had that not been the third time I had dieted down.
And I guess, well, you learn something new every single time, and you're physically in a better position, hopefully, as long as you're doing things right. Would you think nowadays, because there is so much more information, I think it can still be confusing. Would you recommend kind of a first-time competitor to get a coach? Or would
I think that's I mean, you don't have to. You can definitely, there's enough information out there now that if money was an issue, you could probably prep yourself and be okay. But just having that second set of, a coach is a luxury. And I just made a post on social media on this yesterday that, a coach is someone who, you want to find someone who's experienced because they've gone through, you hear me talk about all like my early shows and things like that. I bulked up I got way too heavy after the first show. All those mistakes, I've made those. So my clients aren't going to. And so, if you find someone who's an experienced coach, they can kind of help you avoid some of the mistakes they've made along the way, and that can accelerate your progress also. And also just, the first time there's just so many things that, a person doesn't know, like, what show should I do? What classes am I in? What division should I compete in? Posing, even all the details like tan and posing suits and, There really isn't, a great resource for all of that at this point. It just having a coach, they can answer all of these questions and just be like, you need to do this, you need to do this, and also just give you that second set of eyes. I think a lot of times when someone first starts dieting for their first show, they think, oh, well, I'm pretty lean, I only have this much to go. And I think having that someone experience that second set of eyes to say, well, no, you really have, more than that to go, and you really do need to diet longer than that, and it can make it a better, I think having a coach can make it a better first experience for someone, but, if they don't have the finances, I think there is a lot of information out there that can help them at least, get a good spot without. It's going to accelerate the process and make it easier to have a coach.
Yeah, I think there's a wealth of information out there now, and it's funny you talk about the mistakes you've made and the experiences have made you better because, it definitely does. And like, I always remember back to my first show and I didn't shave my underarms. Like, the judges told me that cost me points and I was like absolutely gutted and that my tan wasn't good enough. And these are small things as maybe a first timer. You don't really appreciate the fact that that's actually counts quite a lot towards things. Whereas if you have a coach, they're going to be like, right, we're 10 weeks out, start like removing hair now because you're going to kind of get irritated and these things happen. You want to make sure that you're not like that. I think as someone doing it for the first time, it's an extreme sport. And I think a lot of other extreme sports, like you wouldn't dare try and do them without any instructions. So even if there are self-help guides online, it's always kind of a good idea to try and get someone to walk you through it. Have you ever had like consultations with clients and found that like getting onto a question I wanted to talk about was that I think going into like bikini or even bodybuilding or men's physique is becoming quite glamorized because of social media. There's loads of YouTubers, there's loads of Instagrammers. have you ever had like, do you make sure to have a consult before a client kind of signs up with you? Have you ever had someone who is kind of like out of their depth and you've had to explain kind of what is really going to kind of how they need to actually go about things? Because I think, I don't know, pure examples is like you see the YouTubers, they're in contest prep and they're like eating out at like like food restaurants, whereas that's probably a rarity for quite a few people when they're in kind of the later stages of contest prep.
Yeah. So I have. I mean, I do an initial phone call or Skype session with all my new clients, before we get started. And, I've had situations where people are like, I want to prep for a show, but it's pretty clear they don't know what that's going to entail. And you've never done it before. I mean, and, nor should they, because like you said, if they follow some of these people on social media, it looks like it's just this breeze and it's easy. And, I think, there's been these newer divisions where like men's physique, you don't have to be quite as big or quite as lean as, pretty much as, as lean as bodybuilding at this point. But, that's what it was created for. Bikini, you don't have to be as big or as lean as like women's bodybuilding or figure. And so, people see that and they think, well, I don't have to be as big or I don't have to be as lean, so that means it's easier. Mm-hmm. And, and that means that's not going to be as hard for me to do it. And it's like, well, you're still getting pretty freaking lean. Someone, who is, doing men's physique, they're probably still like 5 pounds over what they would be on stage. And that's still really freaking, if they were doing bodybuilding, and that's still really freaking lean. Same with bikini. You're not all that much, that far away from where figure or women's physique is at this point. Bikini's gotten a lot leaner too than it was when it first started. And so, to really be competitive, you have to get really lean, and it's going to be hard, even in these divisions where you don't have to get quite as lean or quite as big, and so I think, it's important to realize that. And I think it's important to, as a first-time competitor, to go to a show before you do one or even start dieting for one, to get an idea of what to expect. It's a different world. I remember I went to my first show like in 2003, and it was an NPC show, so it was untested. So I saw a guy who was like 270 pounds win an overall, and I was just like, oh my God, like, it's just a different, it's a different world. And the first time someone goes backstage at a bodybuilding show and sees everything that, people getting tanned and what, all, pumping up and whatnot, all that goes on back there. And, it's like its own little world, its own little culture. And so I think just, getting exposed to some of that before you do a show isn't a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I think it along those same lines, I think, things that I generally look for too in someone who's going to do a first show is, what is their relationship with food? What is their relationship with exercise? What's their relationship with body image? Yeah. If those things aren't good, when you start dieting for a show, it's only going to get worse, because there are people who will have normal like body image, relationship with food, things like that at the start of prep. And things may even skew a little in the disordered direction by the end. You think when you're really lean, you're really hungry, you think a lot more about food, and so, it skews that way even sometimes in someone who has a good relationship. And so, you don't want to start out a prep if you have any of those issues. That's where I usually recommend, you need to go, work with a counselor specializing in body image, disordered eating patterns. And, once you get those, issues kind of squared away and have a much healthier, relationship with food and exercise, down the road, if you want to do something, do it. But, you don't want to, that's the wrong reason, in my opinion, to get into the sport, is to, address, try to fix some of those issues.
Yeah, it's like a weird dichotomy, because it attracts a lot of people who do have those issues. And I've certainly had people come to me and I've had to turn them away because I don't feel prepared to take them on. Like, they've been on very restrictive meal plans. Often it's females who are kind of like doing strange fasting protocols, and it's like they're running themselves into the ground already and they're trying to prep through that. And I respect where they're coming from, but I try and have an understanding and kind of talk with them what I expect and what I'd want with them. And then it would be probably a matter of like a year before we'd actually be ready to feel like they were in a good position to move forward with that. So apart from, and those were great points in terms of you having a good relationship with your nutrition, your training, and just like basically what you're doing right now is complementing things. What about kind of other things like life stresses? Because the other coach, Pascal, actually, recently he kind of showed me the infographic you shared on social media the other day on Instagram, and it was kind of going through where you should, in terms of, are you ready to compete? Is this in your life okay? Is this in your life okay? And he's been through he had sleep issues, he had like an injury with his hip. He'd been dieting a long time beforehand and not much time between. And then he was like at school, he had lots of outside stressors. So yeah, if you could talk a bit about kind of, like outside stressors, and that's almost like a requirement to compete, is to have like a low stress environment.
Yeah, I mean, I have people a lot of times ask me, I've been asked before, what's the best time to compete? And I don't know that there's ever a best time, because, life doesn't stop when you diet for a show. I mean, if you're a natural bodybuilder, this is never going to be your primary means of income. I mean, have I made a little bit of money as a natural pro? Yeah, but I still have a day job, and so life's never going to stop. You're still going to have work. You're still going to have life stressors. Things are still going to come up. So there's never a best time, but, and so at some point, you kind of just need to do it and be able to kind of balance prep and life. And I think that's one thing, you see, like when we were talking about some of the, psychological things to look for before starting prep, I think someone who, where they just don't have that balance, where they think, oh, well, I'm not going to work as much, or I'm going to, you know what I mean? Like you should keep working your job during contest prep, like this isn't that important, and, you should still make money and live a life and not put yourself in, financial, difficulty. But, other than that, things that you're going to want to look for, is having an adequate, like you mentioned, having adequate time, between contests. I've never had less than 2 years between shows, and really for most people, 2-3 years is probably what's going to be necessary to see a visual difference. Yeah. Maybe if you're competing in one of those classes, maybe like, for example, you're someone who doesn't have to get very far above stage weight to feel good and be in that sweet spot. You're competing in one of those divisions where maybe you don't have to get quite as lean. Maybe you're in men's physique or bikini versus bodybuilding, or women's physique or women's bodybuilding. Maybe someone like that, you could see, and you're newer to the sport, you could see visual change maybe in less time than that. But usually 2-3 years is for me, I usually use that as kind of a general ballpark. Also, you mentioned injuries, making sure you don't have any major injuries going into prep. I mean, I think all of us who train hard probably have some little thing that doesn't feel quite right most of the time. Like, it just kind of goes from one place to another, but they're not major things, you just be smart about it and it gets better, and maybe something else pops up a little bit and it's there for a couple weeks and you're smart about it. And, that comes with the territory. But, if you have some major injury where like, hey, I hurt my shoulder and I can't do any pressing movements whatsoever, you want to make sure you get that better before you start prep, because it's not going to, first off, it's not going to help you look your best on stage. And second off, it's not going to help you recover to be in this significant calorie deficit. You generally want to be eating at maintenance, or even, probably maintenance, if you're recovering from an injury, if not above, but probably maintenance is safer. But, you definitely don't want to be in a deficit, during that time. So I think also, what else is going on in your life? If you have a bunch of travel plans, or you have a bunch of, vacation, or you have, wedding, you're getting married, or, something like that. Like, the stage is always going to be there. You can always work around that. And, one thing I always encourage people to do too is, just take longer preps so that you can account for some of those things. And so, all right, I have a wedding on this date where I might be off a little bit. All right, well, that might set me back a couple weeks, but let's, you know what I mean? Like, give ourselves more time, and I think one approach that I use a lot of times with new competitors is, instead of having like, I'm dieting for a show and it is in 16 weeks, like that's traditionally how people have approached it. The way I a lot of times like to approach it is, let's have a number of show options, and, over a few months, let's start dieting. Let's see how prep goes. Once we get closer, let's hone in and pick a couple shows, and and do them. And, that's how I handled my last prep also. And, I had shows, I started dieting and I had shows from April of like the first weekend in April of 2016 all the way through like mid-August. And I was like, whenever I'm ready, and I had a couple shows every month as an option. I knew I was going to do 2 or 3 shows. And I was like, all right, whenever I'm ready, and I'll do them. And by like January, February, late January, early February, it was pretty clear I was going to be ready for as early as I wanted. And so, I did 2 shows and a photo shoot in April and another show in early May, and I was done. But had I not been ready, I had more options, or something come up, or, I had more options later. And I think, at least here I know it's not quite the same in the UK, but in the US, there are natural shows everywhere. I mean, there's shows everywhere all the time. And so, if there's not a show within a few hours of you this month, or if you aren't ready for the show near you this month, there probably is a show within a few hours of you next month in most parts of the country. And so you still, you still have options.
No, I think,
I think that's huge, No,
I think that's a really good and kind of, not good. I forget what the word I'm going for, but it's a mature approach to kind of, be chasing almost like, I think Jeff Alberts talks about it, like chasing the physique rather than kind of chasing a particular stage date. And you are completely right with the UK. We do not have that many shows. They're all kind of spread out across the country as well. So for myself, at least, and for the people I kind of take to stage, sometimes we do have to prepare for a specific point in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, like you said, we just plan. So you just have lots of time to get there. So like we plan in things like diet breaks and stuff like that, so that, I mean, you might not end up taking it, but at least it's there in case you do need it or whatever it might happen, or like plan ahead of time, like plan your season. So if you know you've got a wedding that you need to be alive for, like maybe have a deload around that point in time or something along those lines, can go a long way. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing to talk about. And then in terms of kind of coming to a point in which maybe you are under a lot of stress, maybe prep is kind of getting the better of you, and you haven't got the luxury of having more time, and maybe you need to be ready for a particular date. Have you ever had it with clients where you have to make that rational decision of maybe it's actually not your time to go and step on stage? Like you said, the stage is always there. And then if you have done that, second part of the question, how do you then reconcile that with the person? Because they've kind of had this goal in their mind, and then it's kind of just gone poof. And then they're like, where's my structure, my control? And how do you kind of direct them into kind of they're now essentially a bit of an off season before maybe they compete in the next year?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So, one is a lot of times if something like that were to happen, or for example, if I have someone who wants to compete like sooner than I think they should, without a sufficient off season, or they aren't going to be ready for a show once they do, a lot of times I'll ask them, what do you want to get out of competing? We all have different reasons for doing this, and I gave you mine. I want to look better every single time. So for me, I wouldn't do a show unless I did. But for someone else, maybe they have a different reason to compete. And so maybe they're like, I'm okay with, this. Okay. If you're happy with that and not being all the way there, I mean, you can do that, but you know what I mean? I'm very upfront that you won't be stage lean. This won't be as great of an experience. And 95+% of the time, people are like, I don't want to compete unless I'm ready, and, but a lot of times I kind of just give it, I help them to kind of come see that, it's probably best not to, because, it's not going to allow them to get what they want out of the experience. And so, then what I would do, so for example, I've had people before, because here in the US there are shows all the time, but they pretty much range from April to November. And like December through March, there's not much. And so I've had situations where people were dieting for shows targeting like fall, and they just, they weren't ready, and there aren't options in the immediate future. The option is, in the next options in the spring. And so in that case, then it comes down to, all right, well, we can use this to our advantage and kind of position you to make, the next prep better. So, okay, maybe you had 40 pounds to lose, and you're only going to get down to maybe 10 pounds above where you should be by the end of the year. Maybe, in that case, maybe you still feel okay there, or maybe it doesn't take very much weight regain to make you feel pretty good again. And so maybe we only got to gain like 5 pounds back or something, and so maybe we kind of just take a diet break for a couple months, kind of allow your weight to maybe drift up 3 to 5 pounds so you feel pretty good again. And then let's start again from, 15 pounds or so over and shoot for spring, and you know what I mean? Or something like that, kind of like, I know you mentioned with your own prep, how you were going to be ready early. And so you threw a diet break in there. So that way, you just extended it. And so that would be the same thing, because in their case, if they were dieting, they were 10 pounds over stage in November, they would be ready before like the next show in May or something in their area. And so kind of throwing a diet break in there and then, going the rest of the way, is a good way to do that. With the caveat being that the weight they're maintaining during that diet break's got to be kind of above that threshold of where you feel good. You don't want to be like 5 pounds above stage weight on like a diet break for 2 or 3 months. that probably wouldn't go very well.
Yeah, I mean, when I did mine, I think I was probably just like skirting on the edge of like your lower body fat set point. So it's just about sustainable, but it was kind of tough. But luckily I was in a period where I could allow my calories to go quite high. In terms, I guess it's kind of a question of if they didn't have a show that was going to be relatively soon, so that kind of kept them under control. Maybe they just decided this year's not the year for them to compete. Maybe it's kind of they're going to compete a whole year or 2 years down the line, and it's almost like a post-show, like they're almost like it's post-show blues almost. How do you, and I guess it's the same question, how do you tackle the time outside of prep kind of psychologically?
Yeah, I think a big thing in that situation would be, because I've had people before who decide part of the way through that this just isn't for them, like the amount of sacrifice and effort that you know what I mean, like where you have to go to get stage lean. I mean, it's not easy, I don't know anyone who's ever gotten there and said it was easy. It's not. And so just for some people, that level of effort, that level of sacrifice isn't worth it to them. And they realize that once they get, start getting to the point where they really got to start grinding, and that's fine. That the sport isn't for everybody. Everybody doesn't have to do everything. And so, in their case, then it becomes, okay, well, where is that healthy balance point between your fitness goal? Like let's look long term. Like long term, where is the balance point with your fitness goals in real life? So you have. I always a lot of times explain to people where, you have, on one end of the spectrum, you have, stage lean, everything tracked meticulous, for effort. At one end, you have everything tracked like meticulously, like someone's dieting for a show. You're weighing everything's exact. You're not eating out, all that, level of effort, never missing a workout. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have just doing whatever, living life, zero concern for fitness goals. And, where in between those two is the balance point that works for you, if you're not a competitor. You don't need to, you shouldn't be on either end of that spectrum if you're not a competitor, and you're not dieting for a show. And so then the question becomes, what can we do that, what's doable for you? Does that mean that we go to some sort of looser tracking approach, where maybe you're just looking at calories and protein, or maybe, something even more habit-based where, you have fruit and vegetable servings, maybe protein feedings, and then maybe some calories, something like that. Yeah. Or can we transition that even into, once you've gained some weight back and you feel better and are consistent with your nutrition, can we transition that into even, having you track less and going more intuitive eating approach, but where, what I mean? Like, where is that for you? And so I think that's where the focus then, becomes is at least that's where, I try to skew it then after, transition it to, if they decide not to compete is, all right, that's fine. You don't need to compete, but where can we balance, where is that balance point for you between, how much effort you're willing to put in your fitness goals, where is that happy medium for you?
Yeah, I guess the key is, and I mean, you see it time and time again, people will be right on that strict end and then they go all the way to the loose end, where it's like you're talking about kind of a tapered approach over to a middle ground that works well for you.
Yeah. And let's loosen things. Absolutely. Let's loosen things up. Where do you want to be? And so for some people, they're like, yeah, I have no issue tracking macros every day. All right, track macros every day.
Cool.
That's fine. Other people, I want to do something looser. All right, let's try working towards a more intuitive approach, and it doesn't work for, everyone. And I don't think intuitive eating is great for someone who wants body weight change. It's very good for maintenance. If you're listening to, if you're sitting at a, happy, healthy place with normal hunger signals, you listen to those hunger signals. There are a lot of people, are very, can get to the point where they maintain weight well, and use habits that they've developed and things like that. Some people struggle with that, and still have to probably track a little more than others. But, I think that for someone who's just trying to maintain and find that balance, like that, intuitive eating approach can be really great as long as it's done right. I mean, I feel like a lot of times people, immediately post show want to do intuitive eating, and that's
no.
There's no intuitive eating that's happening post show. Intuitive eating should be based on habits, and your normal hunger signals and things like that. And until you have, normal hunger signals, normal relationship with food, you're consistent, you have those habits. That's when you start transitioning there. Not like I'm done, done prepping, so now I'm just not going to track. And I think didn't Cliff say, I think on your podcast, I heard Cliff say something along the lines of that too, where if someone, says a couple weeks out for their show, they want to take a break tracking afterwards, the post-show period is not going to go well, because that's the worst time to do that. You are going to gain a lot of weight really fast because hunger hormones aren't normal. And you still need to gain weight post-show, absolutely. But I don't think anyone would, if someone got all the way stage lean, you need to be gaining weight after your show. But you don't need to be gaining 30 pounds in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think, Cliff was very much like, holiday, no. Don't go on holiday like to an all-you-can-eat buffet and gorge, because, I guess that's, like we said, it's the one time, especially straight after your shows, that's probably the one time you need to be kind of, meticulous, but not like you're loosening the meticulousness and the kind of analness that you're being, but you need to control it to a degree so you can actually be, like you said, it takes like 4 to 6 months to allow your body to actually be functioning as it should be. Yeah. I mean, based on the data we have, and even with some of my clients who have gained, we've pushed for quicker gain, after a show, and it's still been 3-4 months. I mean, the weight gain happens, but like it almost seems like the hormone levels lag behind a little bit. Just gaining that weight back immediately doesn't mean you necessarily, gain. And, I think post-show, a lot of people always, they're like, well, I'm primed for growth. But if you look at some of the data that's come out recently, like Eric Trexler just had a study come out in bodybuilders, and I think it was over 90 or 95% or more of the weight they gained during the first 3 months after a show, after that initial filling of glycogen, for peak week and eating again. Yeah. After that happens, those first 3 months was 90-95% fat gain in someone who's natural. Wow.
And and that's okay though, because you need to gain some fat back. But I really thought the study was cool because it really showed that as a natural, you're not primed for growth. Your hormones are in a terrible place. You feel terrible. Your energy's not good. You need to gain some body fat back, and you're not primed for growth. But yeah, Eric, that study's published now, but I know he presented that last summer at Lane's camp, and I found that a really cool kind of cohort study in bodybuilders.
No, that is really cool. And I guess, well, if people can think about it now, we're getting more of an understanding of refeeds don't kind of reset things. Kind of a short-term refeeding doesn't get rid of all the diet fatigue that's built up. It's like, well, you've just built up like potentially 6 months of diet fatigue. You're not getting rid of that in kind of like a couple of months. It takes like a decent amount of time. Just to kind of, on a final note, talking about kind of the fact why you love to compete is kind of seeing that physical change, that you're progressing, and I think I think a lot of bodybuilders will be able to relate to that. Is there any other aspects that bodybuilding's kind of brought to your life that you feel like, especially the competing side, that's kind of helped and benefited you, and like you could see it like these benefits could help other people?
Yeah, I think, work ethic would be the biggest one, dieting for a show is probably, it's between that and getting my PhD, the most difficult things I've ever, accomplished, getting like true striated glute stage lean, it's freaking hard, it's not easy. And so the work ethic and the, consistency required to get there is it really takes a lot. And I think it can really show someone how far they can push themselves, how hard they can work, and then they can apply that to other areas of life, And so you look at, people who are really good natural pro bodybuilders. A lot of them are very successful also in other aspects of life, I don't know of many top level natural pros who, like most of them have, a lot of them have multiple degrees. I mean, look at Brian Whitaker. I mean, the guy's a multi-time world champ, won the lightweight class at Worlds like almost 10. I know it's not 10, but I think it's just shy of that times. And, he's a tenured professor, economics professor. And I think he was tenured like before 40, like at a large institution. Like that's crazy, and you can just go through example after example after example. I mean, you look at Doug Miller, you look at, Tommy Jeffers, you look at Lane Norton, you look at, you just go on and on and on. And you see, Philip Ricardo Jr. was an officer in the Marines. I mean, you just on and on and on. These guys are incredibly successful at, what they do outside of the sport. And I think that really, that says something, that 100%. You can take that work ethic and you apply it to real life, you apply it to the sport, and it's amazing, because again, we don't make our living as the natural pro bodybuilder is not going to make their living as, bodybuilding. I think if you win worlds in most of the bigger sanctions, you get like $7,000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's not enough to, quit your day job. And so, I mean, it can be a little bit of supplement income or something, if you're at an elite level, but, you're not going to, you got to have a day job. You got to be successful at that. So, yeah, I think just work ethic is huge. I would say the big thing you can, and just the work ethic and just learning how far you can really push yourself, and what you can go through. I don't know. I think that can be really beneficial.
No, I think I completely agree. When you get to, especially to the later stages where you are like pushing for that striated glutes, striated glutes, and the mental, it's kind of like, it is a mental fortitude that you need to develop at that point. It's not necessarily kind of the fact you have to fit the gym in or any of these things. It's the mental kind of, like, you actually have to really concentrate and make yourself stick to things and be kind of planning, precision, all of these aspects. And I think as like a takeaway point, it's fantastic to leave on, because kind of we're talking about what people, we talked about the glamorization of physique shows and contest prep and whether people are doing it for the right reasons. And I think if people are looking to do a show and they're not thinking, I'm looking to like see physical progress and like mental progress, and like I love the kind of the life skills that I developed from this, and I like the planning, I like the precision, I like the consistency and the kind of all of that stuff, I like the challenge. If then none of that has even come into their head, is maybe not the type of thing for them, and they're just thinking about the photos and the cool shots, that's kind of like just a bonus, I think, is what you'd be saying. Yeah. I mean, it's cool. I mean, I have some cool pictures for some photo shoots to show that I've been there. But I mean, I think that people who aren't in the sport for the right reasons aren't the ones that stick with it long term. And, at the natural level, all the top guys pretty much are late 30s, early mid 40s. So, I mean, and they started as, teens or early 20s. So, most of the top physiques were built with 20 or more years of hard work. And so, if you're going about this for the, you're not in the sport for the right reasons, or it's not rewarding to you, you're not going to last that 20 plus years needed to build the physique that, you could, or maximize where you can go. Yeah, I always say bodybuilding's like a sport of delayed gratification. Like, you don't really appreciate what you've got until like later down the line. So, no, it's been fantastic, and I want to thank you a lot for your time, Peter. I think the audience has probably taken a lot away from the show, especially kind of people who are thinking about competing for the first time, or even stepping on stage for like the first, second or third time, whether it's the right time for them. So yeah, I want to thank you a lot for coming on, and I want to make sure everyone knows kind of where they can reach you. So you talk about your website and online coaching. Is that the best place? You're also on Instagram, is that right? Yeah, so my website's fitbodyphysique.com. I'm on Instagram at fitbodyphysique.
My email is fitbodyphysique@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, just like my personal. I guess I have a business page too, but that doesn't get a lot of reach anymore, so I don't do much with it. But yeah, so any of those places would be good places to contact me.
Awesome. And I'll make sure, I'll link it all below, so hopefully it will help the reach a little bit of your Facebook page. Go and give it a like, guys, because I know Peter will appreciate it. And yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you so much, Peter.
Yeah, thank you.